Hey guys, Miche-Miche here. So I spent the last week creating this little animation, which was my submission to Rokoko's Intergalactic TV challenge. The goal was simple: create a 7-second animation using Rokoko's motion capture tools that could be aired on intergalactic television. I don't remember exactly how I got the idea, but the concept of an intergalactic orchestra performing Dvorak's New World Symphony felt pretty amusing to me. So I'm gonna show you how I made it from start to finish. So I started with the auditorium itself. Living in Paris, I've always loved going to the Paris Philharmony, whose main hall is not only stunning, but also so well engineered that all the spectators can perfectly see and hear the musicians on stage wherever they are seated. So I wanted to take some inspiration from that. I've gathered some references and layouts of the Paris Philharmony I could find, as well as layouts of other venues that could be useful, and I started roughly modeling the stage elements in Blender, kicking things off with the main platform for the musicians on stage. I then modeled a rough blockout for the seats area and tried to match the slope. Now after that, I moved on to modeling the first instruments, starting with the cello. From the front, I modeled it inwards, starting with the outline and progressively adding geometry to fill the front face. After some adjustments on the side profile, I added the neck and extracted the outer outlines of the body to create the golden lining. To make the design more interesting, I changed the shape of the F-holes to symbols of my custom alienish font. With a simple Boolean operation, I could carve those holes to the exact shape into the cello body. The other string instruments were quite similar in the process. In fact, after modeling the cello and a double bass, the modeling of the violin became easier and more efficient. The curvature of the body was very intricate and difficult to match perfectly, but I tried my best to make it appear convincing. Here's me working my way towards the head of the neck. And for the unique touch, 2 horns on the top of the head. The strings are very simply a curve, which I hand-placed along the tension points and then converted to a mesh. For texturing, I relied on some of the default materials of Substance Painter. I felt it was important to stay close to the craftsmanship aspect of the wood and only deviate with some subtle touches of gold. For the alien musicians, I started with a free base mesh from 3D Scan Store. I started working on a first concept, in which I greatly exaggerated the facial features. And you know, bigger ears equals better music, obviously. But the result felt way too cartoony and deviated from what I had in mind. So I trashed it and I moved on to the music part instead. Okay, so while Dvorak's music is now in the public domain, the recording themselves are not necessarily. So that was a great excuse to orchestrate the snippet with virtual instruments. I copied the score, instrument by instrument, note by note, and I got this first version of the music. And then I moved onto a second version, which I wanted to sound a lot more alien. So I started adding instruments that would be unusual to find in a traditional Western orchestra. But this V2 was a little too extreme, and I didn't want to lose the warmth and the character of the real instruments. So the final version for the music ended up being a mix between both versions. Okay, so back to the Blender scene. The next step was to position placeholder characters on stage, according to the orchestration layout that I chose. I think in the final version the setup consists in 8 double bass players, 10 cello players, 12 viola players, 13 second violins, 16 first violins, 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 clarinets, 2 bassoons, 4 horn players, 4 additional brass players, 1 percussionist, and 1 conductor. I also worked on some props, like the music stand, so I took the top part of this model and I used the legs from another model and I made a rig for quick adjustments. Now at this point I went back to the alien musicians, and having trashed the first sculpt, I started over with a blank base mesh. And this time I aimed for an androgynous design to make the characters more anonymous and otherworldly without feeling too extreme. In Substance Painter, I built a very simple layer stack from the provided texture maps of the model, working on the blue tints of the skin, and then adding decorations and ornaments on top. I also added some white body paints for the cool tribal aspect. Not too much, but just enough so that you may wonder, are those musicians parts of a clan? Is orchestral music part of their traditions and customs? Now for their clothings, I really wanted them to look fancy and sophisticated. I liked the clothing designs of the 18th century uniforms, and I was pleased with the looks of the red coat uniforms for my Infinite Journey animation. So I thought about basing this design on similar swing patterns. Alright, now time for some animation. The challenge requires to use one of Rokoko's motion capture tools, and thankfully for those of us who do not have a motion capture suite, there is a free tool available to extract motion from videos and convert it into rigged animation. Now I needed to record animation for all the players and make them all unique, so I got myself fake instruments. I spent a good amount of time observing how each instrument should be held and played, and then I recorded myself playing them to my recorded version of the music. Now, one of the biggest challenges was to perfectly match what the players should really be playing. I probably made some mistakes, and I think the bow movements for some of the string stakes are inverted or wrong, but the whole recording was quite challenging to set up and time was ticking away, so I had to move on. My string players were still missing a bow, so I gave them one and I textured it similarly to the other instruments. I edited a demo using footage and shots from real recordings, and I tried my best to match it in Blender. The pacing was quite fast, but first I wanted to have enough variety in the shots, with some close-ups and wider shots, showcasing all the different players, and second, well, this section of the music corresponds to a very energetic and intense moment of pure romantic music. So I thought that Dvorak deserved a quick camera pacing. Now the interesting part, character animation. So the mocap animations were quite decent in providing an overall block out and body movements, which was particularly useful in giving the characters a convincing motion around their center of gravity. But on the other hand, the final details were not captured correctly, especially the fine hand and arms movements. So to accommodate that, instead of fully retargeting the animation data between the rigs, I used a system of constraints to drive the musician's rig using the mocap rig, focusing mostly on the main articulation points: the heels, the pelvis, and the hands. Because the musician rig has an IK system, using those few points allowed to seamlessly move the rest of the body without overwhelming the entire rig, and with no baked animation data, so it's very easy to continue building on top and refining the small movements. The instruments themselves also need to be rigged so that they react realistically to the character's animation. The simple principle I ended up using is the following. One bass bone that drives the entire instrument, which localizes the point of contact between the instrument and the ground or the musician's chest, and some helper bones that act as targets for the other parts. You have one bone for the left hand of the musician, so that his hand remains on the neck as the instrument is moving, and one for the strings, so that the bow always slides over them no matter the orientation and location of the bow, the instruments, and the right hand. And here's how that looks when everything is set up. Because my mocap animation is one long take, and because the rigs are simple enough, animating each next musician is fairly easy and straightforward. All I need to do is to adjust their position a little bit and slide the keyframes over to a new take. Now, to illustrate what I mean by adding detail in the animation by hand, here is a vanilla animation using only the mocap data. Look at the right arm and bow movement over the strings. The general idea is there, but there's no sharpness in the motion. The movement feels blurred out and it does not match perfectly to the music. So I live recorded an additional layer of right hand movements by moving the IK hand with my mouse, matching to the music. Another example is the percussionist. As they hit the timpani, the mallets should bounce back and rotate inside the hand around the index finger and fall back down following a gravity curve. Now moving on to the conductor, he needs a unique design to stand out from the musicians, and obviously big music equals big ears, and 4 arms instead of 2 for maximum conducting. And the modular aspect of MetaRig made rigging the 4 arms very easy and straightforward. Since I had multiple takes of the conductor animation, I could use a constraint system similar to the other musicians to bind each arm to a specific take so that I could focus on each arm independently for full artistic direction. Now, one aspect I really wanted to incorporate into the conducting animation is the hand movement of the beat pattern. The 9th Symphony 3rd movement is written in 3/4 time, meaning that each measure consists in 3 beats. And here's an example of how a conductor will mark this beat with his hand. To make this hand motion as fluid and smooth as possible, we need to go from broad to finer. So we start by blocking out the overall position of the hand, paying close attention to the momentum of the arm as it stops and goes back the other way. We can then add some rotation to the whole hand and make that rotation lag behind the location of the hand. And finally we animate the fingers, and we make them lag behind even more. And now the overall hand animation looks fairly fluid and smooth. Now for the clothes, I relied on instances to make everything super easy. While each armature rig is unique, the body and head meshes are all instances of the same mesh, and all clothes are instances of the same clothes mesh. That means that everything shares the same UVs and weight painting, making rigging the clothes to each unique musician's animation a very simple process. I've skimmed over some of the details, but that were the broad lines of the scene animation. I hope you guys enjoyed the behind the scenes as much as I enjoyed working on the animation. And alright, take care guys, see ya!